Have you ever stopped to consider the idea that the borders on our maps and the national identities we hold so dear might be completely made up? That the concept of a nation, something billions of people pledge loyalty to, fight for, and even die for, is a relatively new invention in the grand scheme of history? Stick around, because we're about to unravel the origins of this powerful idea, exploring how it came to dominate our understanding of identity, politics, and the world itself. Introduction. Nations shape our modern existence. They define who we are, the languages we speak, and the histories we learn. But the idea of a nation is far from timeless. It's not some universal truth embedded in human society since the dawn of civilization. Instead, it's an intricate story that we collectively created and believed in. In this video, we'll dive into the history of nationalism, unpacking how this concept emerged, why it took hold, and how it transformed humanity. From medieval kingdoms to modern nation-states, the journey of nationalism is as fascinating as it is surprising. What is a nation? A nation isn't just a piece of land enclosed by borders on a map. It's a powerful narrative that binds people together through shared heritage, culture, language, and identity. When we say someone is American, French, or Chinese, we're not just talking about where they live. We're referring to an identity that supposedly transcends time and space. But here's the twist. This identity is largely a fabrication. The idea that a nation has always existed, that its people share a common lineage and culture, is a modern construct. The history of nations is a patchwork of stories, myths, and political strategies stitched together to create unity, sometimes by force. The origins of nationalism. To understand nationalism, let's rewind to medieval Europe. Take France, for instance. Today, France is synonymous with a unified culture, language, and identity. But rewind the clock to the 1200s, and things look very different. Medieval France wasn't a cohesive nation. It was a fragmented collection of fiefdoms and regions ruled by a king who exerted little direct influence over his subjects. Most people identified with their village or region, not the broader concept of France. The idea of being French simply didn't exist. Even language was a barrier. In the early 1800s, only a small portion of the population in modern-day France spoke what we now call French. The rest spoke regional languages like Occitan, Breton, and Basque. It wasn't until centralized policies, such as mandatory schooling and the suppression of regional dialects, that a common language, and with it, a common identity, began to take hold. This phenomenon wasn't unique to France. Across Europe, regions were culturally and linguistically diverse. Borders were fluid, often changing with wars and marriages. The idea of a nation as a unified entity, where people shared a common identity, was nowhere to be found. The birth of national identity. So, when did nationalism begin? The roots of modern nationalism can be traced back to the 18th and 19th centuries, during the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. Philosophers and revolutionaries started questioning the divine right of kings and the feudal system. In its place, they envisioned the nation as the true source of political power. The French Revolution of 1789 marked a turning point. Revolutionary leaders declared that sovereignty belonged not to a king but to the people, a concept that required defining who the people were. They crafted the narrative of the French nation, one united by common language, culture, and history. This idea spread rapidly across Europe and beyond. Nationalism became a rallying cry for oppressed groups seeking independence from empires, like the Greeks under Ottoman rule or the Poles under Russian and Prussian domination. At the same time, it was used by powerful states to consolidate their territories and justify expansion. The role of language and myth. Language was a cornerstone of this new national identity. Governments began promoting a single national language through education and media, erasing regional dialects in the process. For example, Italy, unified in 1861, faced a population where only a small fraction spoke Italian. Most spoke regional languages. The state invested heavily in creating a shared linguistic identity. National myths also played a crucial role. These stories, sometimes based on historical events, often heavily embellished, helped create a sense of continuity. For instance, the story of Joan of Arc in France became a symbol of national resilience, even though her life was far removed from the realities of modern France. These myths gave people a sense of belonging and purpose, turning abstract political entities into something deeply personal. Nationalism beyond Europe. While nationalism began in Europe, its impact soon spread worldwide. Colonized peoples adopted the language of nationalism to resist imperial rule. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi in India and Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam used the idea of a shared national identity to rally their people against colonial powers. However, nationalism also had darker consequences. The same force that united people within borders often created division and conflict between nations. It fueled wars, including World War I and World War II, as countries competed for dominance. In some cases, nationalism was used to exclude minorities, leading to horrific events like the Holocaust. The idea of a pure national identity became a justification for violence and oppression. The modern nation-state. Today, nations feel inevitable and eternal, but they remain a relatively recent development. The modern nation-state, as we know it, emerged in the 19th and 20th centuries. Governments used tools like education, propaganda, and military service to foster a sense of unity. Borders became more rigid, often drawn arbitrarily, especially in post-colonial regions. In Africa and the Middle East, European powers carved up territories without regard for existing cultural or ethnic groups, leading to lasting tensions. Despite its flaws, nationalism remains a powerful force. It unites people, provides a sense of identity, and fuels movements for self-determination. But it also creates divisions and perpetuates conflicts, a construct we still believe in. The history of nationalism shows us that the concept of a nation is not a fixed reality but a fluid idea. It's a story we tell ourselves, one that can unite or divide. Understanding its origins doesn't make nationalism any less real or important. Instead, it helps us see it for what it truly is: a tool, a construct, and a story. As we move forward in an increasingly interconnected world, it's worth asking whether the stories we tell about nations are still serving us, or whether it's time to write new ones. Napoleon's role in nation-building. Napoleon Bonaparte, one of history's most iconic figures, was pivotal in reshaping France into a cohesive entity. His reign marked a departure from a patchwork of loosely connected kingdoms and principalities to the beginnings of a unified nation. Napoleon's imperial cult of personality played a dual role, consolidating his power and shifting the people's loyalty from traditional religious structures to a centralized state. Under Napoleon's influence, France transformed from a disjointed collection of regions into something resembling a singular country. However, the process was far from complete. Although his rule ended in upheaval, Napoleon had laid the psychological groundwork for national unity. The seeds of a collective identity were planted, but the journey to modern France was only beginning. Industrialization. Connecting the dots. The next transformative wave came with industrialization. Unlike Napoleon's psychological unification, industrialization physically bound the country together. Factories emerged, requiring robust networks of railroads to transport raw materials and finished goods. These railroads linked towns and cities, erasing the geographical divides that had kept communities isolated for centuries. This new connectivity was more than logistical. It was cultural. As people from various regions migrated to cities for work, they brought their local identities with them, blending into a new, shared French identity. Urbanization created melting pots where regional languages, traditions, and customs mixed, giving rise to a national culture that transcended provincial boundaries. Education and literacy, the cornerstones of national identity. Recognizing the need for a literate workforce and cohesive citizenry, the French government implemented a national school system. These schools were not just about teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic. They were instrumental in cultivating national pride and instilling shared values. French became the lingua franca, replacing regional dialects and fostering a sense of unity among diverse communities. Teachers, often hailed as foot soldiers of this cultural revolution, played a heroic role in shaping the next generation's understanding of what it meant to be French. Rising literacy rates also paved the way for mass media. Newspapers began to circulate widely, allowing citizens to engage with national events and politics. Suddenly, the capital felt accessible, and people from every corner of France could feel connected to the broader national story. The power of myth and the perception of permanence. While these tangible changes were taking place, the ruling elite cultivated a powerful narrative. The idea that France had always existed as a singular, eternal entity. This national mythology was deliberate, designed to foster loyalty and patriotism. Borders and identities, though newly forged, were portrayed as ancient and immutable. This myth-making extended beyond France. Across Europe, similar stories were crafted to solidify national identities. Italy, for example, embarked on its own unification journey, albeit on a delayed timeline compared to France. The Italian unification, making Italians. Italy's unification in 1861 was a monumental achievement, yet it revealed the challenges of nation-building. At the time of unification, only about 2.5% of Italians spoke the Italian language. The majority identified with their local regions or cities rather than a national identity. One of the leaders of unification famously remarked, "We have made Italy. Now we have to make Italians." The process of making Italians mirrored France's efforts. Schools were established to teach the Italian language and instill national pride. Industrialization played a key role, albeit more slowly than in France. By 1950, only 20% of the population spoke Italian, and regional identities remained strong. It wasn't until the advent of national television in the 1960s that a truly unified Italian identity began to emerge. Educational programs, such as the famous show It's Never Too Late, taught people Italian, bridging linguistic and cultural divides. Germany's path to unity. Germany's unification in the 1860s and 1870s followed a similar pattern. Like Italy, it was a fragmented collection of states with distinct identities. Nation-building in Germany involved a combination of top-down reforms and bottom-up movements, including wars of unification led by Prussia. National myths were again instrumental in fostering a sense of shared identity among disparate communities. The role of myths in global history. These national myths were not just tools for unity, they were catalysts for conflict. As people began to see themselves as part of larger, singular nations, they also began to see those nations as unique and exceptional. This sense of national pride often led to tensions with neighboring countries, contributing to wars and territorial disputes. The idea of the nation as an eternal, unchanging entity influenced global politics and reshaped the world order. It's a concept that has inspired revolutions, fueled independence movements, and, at times, justified imperial ambitions. The modern legacy of nation-building. The processes that unified France, Italy, and Germany highlight how nation-building is both a psychological and physical endeavor. It involves creating shared narratives, fostering connectivity, and instilling pride through education and infrastructure. These processes, however, take time, often spanning decades or even centuries. Today, the legacy of nation-building is visible in our maps, institutions, and identities. Yet, the idea of a nation remains a construct, one that is continually evolving. Understanding its origins allows us to see beyond the myths and appreciate the complex histories that define our world. In conclusion, the idea of the nation is neither ancient nor timeless. It is a relatively modern construct born out of deliberate effort and innovation. From the centralized governance of leaders like Napoleon to the transformative power of industrialization and education, the journey to nationhood reveals how collective identities are intentionally crafted. Understanding this history allows us to see nations not as eternal truths, but as stories we tell ourselves. Stories that have profoundly shaped our politics, culture, and sense of belonging. The emergence of modern nations like France, Italy, and Germany highlights the immense power of collective identity, forged through leadership, myth-making, and the unifying forces of language and education. These constructed identities have given rise to both unity and division, influencing movements for self-determination while also fueling conflicts and exclusion. As we reflect on the history of nationalism, we are reminded of its dual nature, a unifying force capable of inspiring great progress, yet also a source of division and strife. In an increasingly interconnected world, it's worth asking whether the stories we continue to tell about nations serve to unite us, or whether it's time to craft new narratives that better reflect our shared humanity. Now that you know the history of nationalism, what do you think about the nations we live in today? Are they forces for unity, or do they create unnecessary divisions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the ideas that shape our world. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.